Have you ever heard a sweaty Warzone streamer lose a game? They always have something in common. They immediately review what they did wrong. Oh man, I should have pulled my parachute earlier. I overlooked this for a long time. I dive into research focusing on how to improve my aim, positioning, and game sense. I wanted to find ways to make the things I was doing right even better, but I was missing half the equation, which was looking at my mistakes and not just my successes. When we play, we often repeat bad habits until they become cemented in our brains. We get comfortable doing things the wrong way because it feels familiar, but that comfort zone, it's what keeps you stuck.
And beginning to see life just the way it is, then you're a mystic.
Just surviving in sweaty lobbies. I had to confront the harsh reality that many of my habits were actually mistakes, and it started with a harsh reality check. I had to realize that everyone in my lobby was as skilled as me. Thanks to skill-based matchmaking, unlike the early days where you'd encounter a mix of casuals and pros, every fight felt like a true test of skill, positioning, and decision-making. Now every mistake was punished. A bad rotation could lead to disaster, and getting caught out in the open for just half a second could end the game. It's frustrating, especially when you stack kills only to lose to a single error. It didn't matter that I nailed A, B, C, and even D. I messed up at E, and suddenly the game was over. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. If I wanted to thrive, I had to treat every decision with greater importance. In these lobbies, everyone is hunting for that tiny edge to outplay you, and I had to start respecting that every player had earned their spot there. This realization was tough because it felt like no matter how hard I practiced, I was constantly hitting a wall. I'd drop in, put in the work, and still lose fights to players who seemed to have everything figured out. It was exhausting, and the grind felt endless. I was improving, but it was hard to see when my competition was always leveling up too. It created a cycle of frustration. Since everyone can hit a clip like a streamer from mid-COVID, I had to understand that these players had learned patterns that made both themselves and me very predictable. And that predictability, it was rooted in aggressive behavior. Players in sweaty lobbies tend to push every fight, always looking to get the upper hand by outgunning opponents. I mean, that's why you're bad, right? If you can't team wipe a squad with your 60-round SMG, then obviously you should put down the controller, right? So here's a simple question I found. Even the best players can find themselves in a bad spot, but how are they bad enough to get there? Using this question, I broke down 6 things that I had to unlearn from an easier time in Warzone. First was my understanding of loadouts. In the early days, I was so focused on getting my loadout as quickly as possible that I often put myself in vulnerable positions. Gathering money, buying my loadout, and then keeping my weapons became an added layer of stress. It felt like I was racing against the clock, always on edge about getting picked off before I could secure my gear, and back then, with players who might not have been as good as you, that was okay. The reality is the time spent gathering cash and securing a buy station often left me exposed to enemy fire, and lately I'd find myself in these intense situations prioritizing my loadout over my safety, which led to unnecessary deaths. Instead of playing confidently with the weapons I found, I was caught in a cycle of anxiety, constantly worried about losing my loadout to a surprise attack. What I learned was that rushing to grab my loadout wasn't worth it if it meant jeopardizing my chances of survival.
So you're one of those, oh, I'm a jigaboo and want to go my loadout straight away, people. I hate your kind.
I started being more patient, focusing on building my resources while staying aware of my surroundings. This change allowed me to navigate the game more strategically, letting my loadout enhance my gameplay without being the sole focus of my strategy. There are 2 additional reasons why this is true. For one, ground loot has gone absolutely crazy in Warzone lately, some of them being basically loadout equivalent. Once you have your loadout, you have the added mental pressure of not losing it by dying, which can often overpower its benefits. So if you grab your loadout when you can safely do so, and it's not too inconvenient, you're more likely to play naturally. So I had to relearn guns in a more diverse manner. I found that it is much more important to understand each meta gun, its recoil pattern, and in what situations it performs best. If I find an FJX Horix on the ground by chance, it can absolutely beam a team that is concretely focused on looting. It's hard to adjust from looting to gunfights when they are that focused. Second, rethinking my opponents. It no longer works to think about how best to push a team and why their position sucks. If you want to stack kills, you need to think about their agenda.
Oh, he followed us.
Early game, like we said, it's looting. And oftentimes they will be so obsessed with finding good loot that they won't notice your approach. Following this, the most sweaty, skilled players have found their loot and want to push engagements. If you've cleared a location, you're in a prime spot to capitalize on weakened enemies, and it can work really well to engage from a distance, softening up opponents before rushing in to finish the fight. During the mid-game, teams claim key areas, trying to predict late game circles. For example, if you see multiple sniper glints from prison roof aimed at Nova 6, they're aware that they'll need to move soon. A smart player might flank from the back of prison and catch them off guard for an easy squad wipe. In the late game, teams use stims and smoke to rotate. Revealing their positions and intentions, players tend to group up and play defensively or create singular, calculated attacks as a team. So if you haven't rotated properly, you could be in trouble. Positioning is critical at this stage and often decides the winning team before the final circle even plays out. For more on mastering late game strategies, check out my last video. Anyways, I was able to position myself in the way of opportunity, and it led to more kills and a much higher likelihood that I would reach the endgame. But despite this success, I wanted more out of my engagements.
You find it hard to feel good about yourself. And this is what sucks all the joy out of your life.
And as it would turn out, the game had more to offer. Third, resource management. Instead of relying on equipment like UAVs or airstrikes to locate teams or finish off down players, I had to rethink my approach. I found it more effective to use gunfire pings to identify enemy positions, reserving my UAVs for assessing nearby threats in tight situations. This way, I can keep a closer eye on potential aggressors, and utilize airstrikes to deny aggressive teams a safe path towards me. In essence, the ultra-aggressive playstyle of many players forced me to adopt a mouse and cat strategy, where baiting and evading became more effective than simply trying to outgun my opponents. This shift in tactics allowed me to navigate tense situations with greater confidence and control. I started practicing taking out one teammate, and then quickly moving to a room or two away, knowing that the aggressive nature of my lobbies would prompt a chase. This allowed me to plate up and reload, ensuring that the next teammate had to challenge me at full health. In the past, I often adopted an all or nothing approach, either fully committed to a fight or fleeing. This would frequently lead me to a vulnerable position when being pursued, and in this situation, knowing when to use equipment is valuable as well. Instead of using Bettys to camp a room or flares to attempt to get a stick, I started using them to block off the rows myself. When I got the initial down, I noticed that teams would attempt to manage their panic from being weakened and quickly respond, as if they were in a 3v4 situation. And that's why monitoring proximity chat became very important to reading the situation. An older version of me used proximity chat to get laughs and sometimes even engage in discussion with those around me.
Yeah, I had a gun.
But I realized that I had to refine my listening skills. Instead of rushing into fights, I began to focus on the chaos of their chatter. I'd wait and listen for keywords like downed or push, which indicated their state of mind. This told me when they were feeling confident or when they were on their back foot. They would even give their location away of their next movement. I started practicing this in every match. If I heard multiple voices overlapping, I knew they were either confused or overwhelmed. I would take a moment to assess the situation, often positioning myself in a way that could flank them while they were still sorting out their communication. It was about capitalizing on their mistakes. While they were trying to figure out who was where, I could get the drop on them. Over time, this skill evolved. I learned to recognize patterns in their communication. For instance, if one player repeatedly asked for help, I could immediately understand their specific room was going to host most, if not all, of the enemy team. And every room has weaknesses, angles, and limitations. I was only able to relearn weapons, equipment, and opponents because of my next point, reviewing my gameplay, both in the moment and rewatching older clips. At first, I would just brush off my losses, thinking I needed to grind more hours. And I would only watch previous gameplay if I hit an impressive clip, but eventually I realized that this mindset was really holding me back, and footage had a lot more to offer than good feelings. So here's how I started approaching it. First, I began recording my matches and focusing on specific moments, especially where I died. I'll rewind and ask myself what led to this. Was I engaging without enough intel? Did I get caught off guard? Recognizing these scenarios was the first step to understanding my mistakes. Next, I learned to ask deeper questions. Instead of just thinking what went wrong, I challenged myself with what could I have done differently. Sharing my gameplay with friends was a huge help too. They often pointed out things I missed, like not using cover cover effectively or ignoring sound cues. Getting that outside perspective really opened my eyes to areas for improvement. To keep track of my progress, I started a log of my reviews, noting specific mistakes, lessons learned, and goals for the next session. This documentation helped me stay accountable and focus on my weaknesses. For example, if I struggled with positioning, I'd make a point to stay behind cover in my next match. These goals helped me keep on track for continuous improvement, but I wasn't happy simply reviewing my gameplay and noting what I had to do better. I wanted to develop my own style, almost like if I watched the gameplay I would know whether or not it was me. And yes, this does make me a little bit of a nerd. And it came from watching talented Warzone players. I started by tuning into live streams and YouTube videos of top tier players, but not for enjoyment or for a good laugh, but to break down their game. I was amazed at how they seemed to always know where to go, what to do, and how to engage enemies effectively. But it wasn't just about the mechanics, it was also about their mindset, how they remained calm under pressure, even in intense situations. To reinforce what I was learning, I would pause during crucial moments to dissect their choices. I would ask myself questions like, why did they push here? Or what was their reasoning for rotating that way? This helped me think critically about my own decisions. Incorporating these insights into my gameplay has been a game changer. By watching professionals and applying their strategies, I've seen significant improvements in my own performance. It's about learning from the best, adopting their techniques, and continuously using them to refine my own skills. To close, if you can start to rethink the way you understand Warzone, break down what seems alright but is actually holding you back, there's room for you to grow as a player. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey of improvement in Warzone. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Join our community where we will continue to explore tips, tricks, and strategies to help each other level up in Warzone.